Unit 4 has talked about linear functions, and we've discussed very much in depth the idea of slopes. Today, we're going to talk about parallel and perpendicular lines. If you look at parallel lines, you look at these lines right here, we know that they never intersect. Because of that, it means that their slopes are equal. So parallel lines have equal slopes. There's no points that they have in common. They never cross. And if I was to look, for example, at y equals 1/2 x minus 3 and another equation, y equals 1/2 x plus 5, if I was to graph these lines, you would notice that, let's call this one line 1 and this one line 2. Line 1 would cross the y-axis. The y-intercept is -3. The slope is 1/2, which means you go up 1 and to the right 2. So from -3, you would go up 1 and to the right 2. Up 1 and to the right 2. This would be the line of line 1, the graph of line 1. Line 2, the y-intercept is 5. And from that, the slope is also 1/2. That means you, again, go up 1 to the right 2. Up 1 to the right 2. Up 1 to the right 2. And so on, if you were to extend it forever. You would notice that these two lines never cross. And so because of that, it's important for us to always remember that the slopes, if two lines have equal slopes, they are parallel. On the other hand, perpendicular lines are lines that intersect, they cross at exactly one point, and they create 90-degree angles. And in order for two lines to be perpendicular, their slopes are not only opposite, but also reciprocal. So, opposite reciprocal slopes are perpendicular lines. Let's take, for example, y is equal to 1/2 x minus 3. The slope of this line is 1/2. In order to have a line that is perpendicular to it, therefore creating a 90-degree angle, the slope has to be the opposite sign and the reciprocal. So if the slope is 1/2, the slope of a perpendicular line is the opposite of 1/2. Right now it's currently positive. So the opposite would be negative, and the reciprocal of 1/2 is 2/1, or just 2. So if we look at this equation here, y equals -2x minus 3, well, you can change the y-intercept. It can be different. The y-intercepts are totally different. It has nothing to do with it. Let's say it's plus 5. If I was to graph the top one as line 1 and the bottom one as line 2, line 1 would cross the y-axis at -3. It would go up 1/2, up 1/2. And line 2 would cross at 5. And we'll go down 2 to the right 1. Down 2 to the right 1. Down 2 to the right 1. If this was done perfectly on graph paper with very precise measurements, you would be able to measure this angle right here, and this one, and this one, and this one, and you would notice that they all measure 90 degrees. So the takeaway from this is the fact that when you have perpendicular lines, their slopes are opposite reciprocal. And when you have parallel lines, their slopes are exactly the same. If we were to look at these lines, so we're looking at line 1, line 2, line 3, and line 4. If I wanted to see which ones are parallel, I would have to identify which ones have equal slopes, exactly the same. Well, the slope of this line is 4/3, as is the slope of this line. So these two lines, y equals 4/3 x plus 3 and y equals 4/3 x minus 5 are parallel. And those two little lines that are slanted is the symbol for parallel. The other lines, y equals 2 and y equals -3, if you remember that saying, zvux hoi, if it crosses the y-axis, if it's y equals, it's horizontal, which means its slope is 0. Y equal to equations are horizontal lines. Y equals a number is horizontal, which means the slope is equal to 0. So y equals 2 and y equals -3, those two lines are parallel to each other. Looking at part B, y equals 3x plus 2, y equals -1/2 x plus 4, x plus 2y is equal to -4, and y minus 5 equals 3 times x minus 1. The first equation is in slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, which means that the m is equal to 3. The second equation is also in y equals mx plus b, and its slope is -1/2. The third equation is not in y equals mx plus b, it's not in slope-intercept, it's actually in standard form. The standard form is ax plus by is equal to c. Now, I'm going to teach you a little shortcut. This is not taught in most books, but hopefully this will help you. If an equation, a linear equation, so let's be specific, if a linear equation is in standard form, you can quickly calculate the slope by doing the opposite of a over b. Let me show you the reason to why this is. If I have an equation, ax plus by is equal to c, and I'm trying to get the m in the y equals mx plus b, what I would do is I would minus the ax, and I would get by is equal to -ax plus c. Then if I divide by b to everything, you notice that you get y equals -a over b x plus c over b. The process of figuring this out, or the reason to why I'm doing this, is to demonstrate to you that if you're good at memorizing things, by understanding the reason to why the slope is really -a over b, you can just simply remember that if it's in standard form, the slope of a line is always going to be the opposite of what a is divided by b, or -a over b. So instead of having to transform this equation into y equals mx plus b, if you already know it's in standard form, then you can immediately say, oh, the slope is going to be the negative of a, which happens to be 1, over b, which is 2. With the fourth equation, you notice that, hopefully, this is actually not in standard form, but it is in point slope format. Point slope, let's write it in black so you could see it. Y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. The m is 3, because it's the number in front of the x minus x1. So the slope of this line is 3. Let's make it, there we go, in case you're watching it. So if I was to ask you which of those 4 lines are parallel, you would say that the lines that have the equal slope. So the ones with the equal slope are this one and this one. Those are parallel to each other. And then the this guy and this guy, because those have slope of 3. So what this is saying is that this line is parallel to this line, and this line is parallel to this line. Now, on the other hand, we can try to figure out if lines are perpendicular by also using the slope idea. Remember that perpendicular lines are opposite sign and reciprocal. Not one or the other, but both. So in order to be perpendicular, you have to have the opposite sign. So if you're positive, the other one must be negative. If it's negative, the other one must be positive. And reciprocal together. So it's really opposite reciprocal. All right, let's look at the first one. X equals -2. X equal equation, VUX, VUX, HOI, vertical line, undefined slope is when it's x equal 2. So an x equal 2 equation is undefined. So we know that this slope is undefined. We know y equals 1 has a slope of 0. So right now I can see that those two lines are perpendicular. An x equal 2 equation is vertical. That's why it's undefined. A y equal 2 equation is horizontal. That's why the slope is 0. Those two are perpendicular. So x equals -2 is perpendicular to y equals 1. That's the first one. Next one. Y equals -4x. The slope is -4. Remember again, if I am looking at this equation and I am imagining that it's in y equals mx plus b format, the b is 0, but the m is -4. Now if I'm looking at this last equation, it's currently in point slope format. Y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. Hopefully you all can see that yellow. M is 1/4. -4 is the same as -4/1, and 1/4 are reciprocal of each other. And not only are they reciprocal, but they're also opposite signs. One is negative, one is positive. So these two lines are perpendicular to each other. And the way that I would write it would be y equals -4x is perpendicular to y plus 2, y plus 2 is equal to 1/4 of x plus 1. So this sign right here means is perpendicular to, just in case you didn't figure it out, is perpendicular to. The next group of questions that you are going to have to go through is when they ask you to write an equation in slope-intercept form. So write an equation in slope-intercept form, which we know slope is m, intercept is the b, so that means the equation is y equals mx plus b. Write an equation in slope-intercept form for the line that passes through -4, 1. Okay, so that means this is a point, x1, y1, and is parallel. Parallel means equal slope to the graph of y equals x plus 3. By looking at the by looking at the line y equals x plus 3, we know that the slope is 1 because it's understood that the coefficient, if it's not stated, is 1. So the slope is 1. We know that a parallel line to that slope must also have a slope of 1. So now we have a point, and we have the slope. And when you have point and slope, you use the point-slope formula. Y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. Now I fill in the y1, the x1, and the m. We know that y minus y1 is 1, is equal to m is also 1, times x minus x1 is negative 4. Two negatives next to each other become a positive. There's the equation in point-slope, but they want it in slope-intercept. So your job is to put it in y equals mx plus b. From that, it means you're going to simplify that. So if I take y minus 1 is equal to 1 times x plus 4, when I distribute the 1, it's not going to change anything. It's just 1 times x and 1 times 4. Now I need to add 1 to both sides so that I have it in y equals mx plus b. And I get y equals x plus 5. That's y equals mx plus b. Similarly, when you're asked to find perpendicular lines through a given point, when you see the word perpendicular, you should immediately think opposite reciprocal slope. Okay, so with that, if I know that I am asked to write an equation in slope-intercept form, so I'm asked to write the equation in y equals mx plus b, for a line that passes through 6, 4, that's my x1 and y1, and is perpendicular to the graph of y equals 7x plus 1. Well, the slope of this line is 7. The perpendicular line, it has to be the opposite, because 7 is positive, so negative. And the reciprocal of 7 over 1 is 1 over 7. So the slope is negative 1/7. Step 2. Well, now I have a point and a slope. When you have point and slope, you use the point-slope form. Y minus y1 is 4 is equal to the slope of my new line is negative 1/7. That's the one I'm trying to figure out. Times x minus x1 is 6. Now with that, I need to make sure that it is currently in slope-intercept form. So in order to put it in slope-intercept form, I am going to distribute the negative 1/7, rewrite y minus 4 is equal to negative 1/7 x, negative 1/7 times negative 6 over 1 becomes positive. And remember how to multiply fractions, you multiply across 6/7. So plus 6/7. This is still not in y equals mx plus b format because I need to add 4 to both sides. You get y equals negative 1/7 x. 6/7 plus 4 is 4 and 6/7. Please make sure that you are doing the independent practice. It's really important that you understand how to do these, even though we will have time in class and review it. But make sure that you're understanding the most important things. Parallel lines have equal slopes. Perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal. So when you're trying to figure out the equation of a line that is either parallel or perpendicular, your job is to figure out what the slope of the new line will be, and then using point and slope, point-slope form, plug it in and transform it to whatever form they're asking you to write it in.